Susan Schreibman is full professor of digital arts and culture at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences of Maastricht University. In September last year, that's very important for us, she has been appointed as director of DARIAH. Susan Schreibman has been a pivotal figure in the field of digital humanities, having held leadership positions at several prestigious institutions, including Trinity College in Dublin and the University of Maryland, before joining Maastricht University. She works at the intersections of computationally based teaching and research in the interplay of the digital archive, cultural innovation, and participatory engagement design processes and projects. She has a research focus in the design, critical, and interpretative analysis of systems that remediate publication modalities and manuscript culture from the analog world while developing newborn digital paradigms. Her areas of specialization include digital humanities, of course, media studies, literary modernism, and Irish cultural studies. She is the series co-editor of Topics in the Digital Humanities and the founding editor-in-chief of the peer-reviewed journal of the Text Encoding Initiative. In addition, she is a co-editor of the Companion to Digital Humanities and the New Companion to Digital Humanities, very important journals. And today she will talk about the long and all too short history of digital scholarly editions, and not only because our institute focuses on digital editions, is this a highly interesting topic that fits perfectly into our lecture series. So, Susan, it's a great pleasure and honor for us to have you here as a guest speaker. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, thank you for that lovely introduction. I think I will speak about almost everything you talked about except participatory projects, but the call for the DARIAH annual event will come out at the end of this week, and it is on participatory digital humanities. So please, you know about this already though. There will be many topics within it, so please look and think about the DARIAH annual event this year. So thank you for inviting me to speak. And this talk really connects lots of my past research with my present day interests, particularly in my role as one of the directors of DARIAH. And I really want to have a conversation at the end and welcome your thoughts about how we can, what word do I use, solve some of the issues I'm going to raise today. Because I think this center is key to lots of these issues. So my title today comes from two sources. I have a background in literary studies, and one is Mary Queen of Scots, who is purported to have stitched into a pillow in the years before her death, "In my end is my beginning." But T.S. Eliot reframes this in his late poem, Four Quartets, "In my beginning, in my end." And in digital humanities, we know that the decisions that we make at the inception of our digital projects play an outsized role in their afterlife, while thankfully the majority of us don't have to think about our imminent demise at the end of a literal chopping block. The metaphorical one looms large for a lot of our digital scholarship. So I'll maybe begin with a little background as to why I think about this. Maybe not all the time. I do bug Mate about this. He must think all the time, but a lot of the time, I think. So for like the last 25 years, I've been creating these digital editions. And the first is this one, this Thomas McGreevy archive. It was my postdoc. It was my first foray into digital things. And shockingly, it went online in around 2000. It still functions. It's online at IF in Virginia. It's amazing. I think mostly because it's really simple technologies. And every once in a while it falls over and they restart the server and he kind of starts up again. And the one that poor Mate has to live with. Also my letters 1916-23 that very graciously you host here, and it's just about ready to collapse, and it does frequently. And you guys have made it so that it can stay alive, and maybe we hope to do more. So whatever we call these things, digital scholarly editions, digital archives, digital projects, there are many, I think hundreds, thousands of them probably, developed over the last kind of 30 years. They have relatively short lifespans, despite the many millions of whatevers, dollars, euros, pounds, that have been invested in them by our institutions, by our labor, by universities, by foundations. And certainly their lifespan is a fraction of what we expect from print, even though much of our print publications is digital. So now I find myself looking for these long-term solutions for my digital projects, and it's really complex, it's very slow, there's no guarantee of positive results. And I think, well, what about scholars with less resources and connections that I have? What happens to their digital scholarship? And I think it just ends up in this digital rubbish heap. It's disconnected from the web and lost to the scholarly community. I had an email exchange with Anne Bayot the last couple days, and I said I was looking for her Berlin intellectuals online, and I found lots of references, but I couldn't find the project. And she sent me this long, sad, plaintive email about what has happened to it, which is that it's offline. And she explained why. It's been online, it's been offline, and she said I might have to use an inheritance to get it back online. And I thought that we shouldn't have to do that. Like, one should not have to do that. I was going to say any more, but maybe at all. So sometimes we're told, well, decompose the files, whatever they are, TI, whatever they are, maybe that's even old-fashioned now, and put them in a repository. But often with these types of works, that's only a fraction of the scholarship. A lot of it goes into creating the edition, the surrounds, the contextualizations, the annotations, et cetera, the browsing, the metadata, the scholarly apparatus. That's what makes them so unique and quirky, but also that's what hinders their longevity. So maybe where we are today, framing the problem. Oops. So typically, and when I teach digital humanities and when I have a new project and I work with my teams, I say, okay, we have these 3 questions that we should answer when we start our projects. And I think they're still good questions, but often these questions don't address the durability of the projects themselves. And I think the reason for their lack of durability are many. One is that at one point, no one really thought about it. It wasn't the first thing that we thought about when we created these editions. The other is, and I'm going to blame probably some of you in the room, are the developers. Maybe not all of you in this room, but in some rooms, because often you're, as a humanities researcher, you're at the mercy of someone with the expertise way more than you have. And a lot of people do want to develop with the technologies that they know, which may not be the most sustainable, with the newest because it's more fun, and maybe not using frameworks that are out there because, yeah, it's not as interesting. Even if you don't face those things, your project may disappear because the host institution decides we can't support it anymore. It needs updating after time. It might be that you move institutions and the technology stack that was perfectly fine before is not fine here at this new institution. Certainly in Europe, we're asked increasingly to create these data management plans for how the data will be stored later. or destroyed after the project. But for these complex data-driven editions, the most we can promise is to decouple the data from the infrastructure and upload it into university or national repository, if you live in a country lucky enough to have one, or maybe put it in public one. But then a lot of the project disappears. I think the other things that are important about it, the metadata, the searching, the browsing, the UX that provide the interface, that just disappears. So in fact, it's not the project at all, it's some fraction of it. So maybe how did we get here? A very short history. I gave a version of this. I've been giving different versions. The last one we did at DH last year in Lisbon, because as you'll see as I go through, my other DARIAH directors are also interested to see how we might make this an issue that DARIAH can help to contribute an answer to. So the publication and partnerships of these editions were and still are outside the normal pathways of publication in the humanities, i.e. publishers. So we don't have that longevity that we expect when you publish with a traditional publisher, with a journal, and with the majority of DH scholarship carried out with this bespoke funding. It has clear start and end dates. And nevertheless, I imagine even when we start, no one sets out to work on a digital edition with the idea that it will last less than 5 years. We create them, I think, with the expectation they're going to become part of the scholarly ecosystem. And I think that problem of short-termism is a detriment to the field. And I know I've had conversations with colleagues over the years who, after their first digital project, say they're staying away from this scholarship because they feel, why should I publish this way when I could publish articles and it will be around for, decades to come? And they're not wrong. So in researching this talk, I realized, or maybe I remembered, because you mentioned I was at University of Maryland in the 2000s, it was in the US, and a lot of these conversations were happening then. It was not long after the first scholarly editions were created that people began thinking about their longevity. And the Mellon Foundation was key, really a really early major player that began to ask us to think about the issue of sustainability. And in 2010, they published this, paid for this symposium that was organized by Jerome McGann, The Shape of Things, and it was really about how we sustain this scholarship. He did everything right. There were a number of articles about the conference based on the panels. We wrote them. He published them with Rice University Press in a digital edition, open access. And then a couple, not even years later, Rice University Press went out of business. All the digital files disappeared, and I was able to find this in the Wayback Machine. So it was, I think, it's a very particular sting in the sustainability tale. Even if you do things right, they may not work. Some of you probably know some of these or know of some of these initiatives. I won't go into all of them that have begun to address this issue. Many of them funded at that time by the Mellon Foundation. 2 of them are on this slide, Nines and Romantic Circles. They were developed to aggregate content that was being funded and going on, and they were thought they might be too big to fail. I don't think that was the case. And many of you probably have heard of Project Bamboo, which was a particular, what word should I use, failure in developing a system that could be a be-all, end-all system for digital scholarship. I also looked at the record, and there have been a lot of people writing about this. So we started soon after these editions were created. This is a quote from Lorna Hughes, that the very funding instruments that enable the growth of digital humanities has within it the seeds of its failing as well. Even if, as I said, you do all the right things, you work with individuals, for example, a library that might host it, a DH center, create a resource according to the standards of that particular time, it still may be orphaned. And there's little interest in funding agencies in refunding existing projects unless they are projects of, say, national importance. So you try to find new ways to get more funding to keep the thing going. And I think many institutions are very ill-equipped to sustain these projects for the long term in terms of both expertise and or interest, even if you never move institutions. Over a decade after that conference, Joanna Drucker, who had been at IATH at the time, moved to UCLA. She brought with her in her bag, her virtual bag, her projects that were done according to the standards that IATH, the Institute for Advanced Technology, used. And she writes about it that when she arrived at UCLA with her bag of digital stuff, they said, oh, we can't host this. We don't use these technologies. We can't do it. Everything would have to be redone with the stack we use. So the issues, as she notes, are beyond the technical. Some of these are motivational. Sometimes people think, okay, I've done that project, like I've written that book, I want to move on. I don't want to sustain it my entire academic career. But I think one of her points here is key, that in putting the responsibility on the individual researcher is misplaced, as the vast majority of researchers don't have the funds or the skills or the institutional role to create sustainable solutions at the institutional level. And this is, I think, something that maybe if we stop putting the blame on the individual researcher, as Anne wrote me that maybe it was her fault. I said, no, it's not your fault. I felt like a counselor. You know, I mean, I think this is what happens so too often, no matter how good or not good the projects are. Even Sendari was funded with quite a large grant, an EU project. It was attached to DARIAH at the time. Jennifer Edmond was the director. She was a director of DARIAH as well. And it was to create an infrastructure. They can and do become unsustainable when the funding runs out, as Sendari did. And they wrote some articles, and this is a quote, that with careful planning, and they had very lofty goals. The project, the resource, doesn't work anymore. In fact, it virtually stopped a couple years, not even after its completion. And there's no visible reuse of the assets that are there. A 2019 article by King's College University folks, they had a very big project to take all their legacy projects and modernize them, put them into an infrastructure that they could sustain over time. And they note that despite the European and institutional push to create data management plans, these fail the long-term needs of complex scholarly additions. So I think despite 15 years of sustained effort at the EU level, at institutional level, within the field, we haven't come close to solving this issue. So considering DARIAH's role within the European research ecosystem, me and my fellow directors, maybe Mate, because he comes to some of our meetings when we talk about this, it's an issue that research infrastructures could help to provide some solutions. There are some projects, I think, that have bucked this short-term trend, but I'd argue that these projects, impressive as they are, survive due to the tenacity of an individual or individuals working within specific funding environments. So Voyant is one of them. They've had very generous funding in Canada, although now they are looking for closer connections with us in Europe. Actually, I didn't realize Canada can be in Horizon projects. And they're now shifting to a consortium model. Omeka, also interesting publishing platform developed at George Mason. It's used by a lot of libraries, and now it's part of a suite of open source tools that are part of a not-for-profit company called Digital Scholar that pool their resources through a service model. And the Orlando project, also a Canadian project, a database for feminist literary history, was begun through a series also of Canadian grants and is supported by the University of Guelph, but there's a publication through Cambridge University Press with some of the aspects of the project available through subscription. And the same is for an edition of Beckett's writing. Dirk van Hoel has that, and again, Cambridge has taken that on as a subscription model. So I think these are four, maybe you'll come up with more models of sustainability of these digital scholarly editions in 2025. What seems to me the most unsustainable is what we've been doing for over a quarter of a century, is building these bespoke editions with short-term funding and watching them decay after the funding ends. And we're still doing it, and we're still getting money for it. But part of it, I would argue, is also a problem with our funding models, because that's what they prefer and reward. New projects that start at the beginning and have a specific end. So, could a solution? I'm not sure. Could a solution be shifting the idea of these projects from project to process? Maybe. Can we privilege not just the final product, but the workflows, the methodologies, the intermediate outputs? Could we be more transparent about these intermediate processes because they would be useful for other researchers? We do that at times in the articles we write, but could we do it through the digital process itself? As valuable a platform as a SSH open marketplace is for sharing and citing digital data, in its present state, it doesn't go far enough in providing solutions to this particular issue, because you need to have a host somewhere else, and it's basically linking resources. So could a solution come in the form of hosting content, not just linking to it, and providing some long-term frameworks for migrating the data into a sustainable format, maybe something like WARC, the Web Archive format, or some other formats that I know you are working on here. So to foster this shift in perspective and ensure that it gains wide acceptance in the research community, I think it's incumbent upon us to make the case that we're no longer operating in environments that are self-contained, and the EU is really pushing for this contained environments, but within these digital ecosystems that should prioritize both use, which we're good at, but also reuse. And so the mindset is simply not one for researchers, but for the institutions and the funders that enable our digital scholarship. So these traditional digital archives, or boutique collections as we call them, remain key to many disciplinary fields. Many of our colleagues create them because they have a very particular individual or epic or region that they want to make visible as part of the scholarly ecosystem in a digital format. But there needs to be also maybe a change in mindset in order to design and develop these projects in such a way that they integrate seamlessly into broader FAIR ecosystems, maybe data services and workflows for use, but also reuse, and maybe that reuse is key. So if one is lucky enough to have one's project hosted through a DH Center, one might be lulled into a sense of complacency that the center would be able to maintain the project into perpetuity. And that's what's very interesting about this series of articles that they wrote at King's, where they looked at all of their projects, and they say that some of them they try to get rid of, as it were, that the PI had moved on, and they tried to get the PI's new institution to take it on. Some they just let go, and some they did put into a new technology stack. But we know that like good things don't last forever, and centers themselves, and maybe this is something that's happening here, are also struggling under the weight of maintaining legacy projects. So this is one example. In 2006 and 17, they undertook a review of 100 projects at King's over a 20-year, created over a 20-year period. And I think the quote summarizes the frustration and the failure that we have as a community to come up with these long-term sustainable solutions. But another project that's really interesting in this space is called the Endings Project, very aptly named, which was carried out in 2020 and 21 at the University of Victoria at their DH Center, and the goals for the project are on this site, and they were really good about writing up a lot on this project. They have an online issue, they have a lot of web-based material, and basically they didn't have nearly as much as King's, but they had quite a lot of digital projects over a long period of time, and they thought, okay, how do we keep them from disappearing, falling over, dying, going offline? So the issues they discovered maybe weren't surprising, and they reiterate a lot of the issues that you read that King's found, and indeed that many of us know about. Our reliance on in DH to use off-the-shelf frameworks and libraries that quickly are ultimately guaranteed to fail. They note that more successful projects either rebuild the application in repeated cycles of funding, as I mentioned earlier, or they see them languish and disappear. As a DH center, they said they felt they were part of the problem, that they built these things for the researchers that came to them, and so they felt they needed to be part of a solution. And they didn't want to just rebuild them for the short term. They wanted to rebuild them so that they had a more durable lifespan and not have to do this every decade. So the project had a lot of deliverables, including, as I said, some articles, but I'm going to dwell on one main takeaway under section 4, under their principles page online, where they outlined the technology recommendations. And one of their main conclusions was that the fewer flourishes in the software, the longer the project seems to last. They wrote this seems to be a no-brainer, but we don't take it to heart. As I said, particularly, they also write, even though they're developers, often the developers who wish to work with latest technologies and put their kind of individual stamp on a project should probably be doing the opposite. And they also recommend archiving in multiple repositories. But they also note that the long-term curation requires preservation of not only the static data, the files, the XML, HTML, whatever they are, but also the experience of using the web application and maybe the associated tools. 4.2, and maybe we can have a discussion, they indicate their adherence to 3 technologies, HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS. Maybe we could speak about that later. So how does one do this maybe? So I have some colleagues on the DARIAH board that are very into all the very big European projects. Sally Chambers is one of them, and we have many conversations about this. And EOSC, certainly you're involved in EOSC as well. It's going to be theoretically a one-stop shop for data stewardship through web, data and services for science in Europe. And I asked her, what about these kinds of projects? And she hesitated a bit because maybe this is not going to be managed, this kind of data anyway. I think it's probably too low on the pecking order of data. Certainly the first iterations, I think, will support more ubiquitous data formats. Oscars, that I somehow got involved in, also aims, it's a partner project of EOS to foster uptake of open science across the disciplines. It doesn't look like we're going to tackle this in the first phase, although we heard there will be an Oscars too, so maybe there will be some opportunity to get in at the ground level for that. Other projects, Eden, digital preservation, Fidelis, sustainability, maybe these projects might be places we can look. But even if we see, even when you do this, all the right things, PIs, digital projects are often fragile, poorly or undocumented, or overly customized, and they don't survive their creators. But as I said, maybe blaming humanities researchers is not fair. You're often at the mercy of working with people who do the development. So how does a poor humanities researcher ensure their project is robust, it's interoperable, it adheres to certain design principles from day one? And this is an answer I don't have. But I think it is a mindset in the entire community that would have to change in order for these projects not to simply keep disappearing. So how do we do that? How do we change these mindsets? How do we orchestrate projects so that they're not about chasing the latest tech? How do we build systems that other developers can come in and understand what has been done? I think I was thinking, and maybe I missed a good opportunity, there was just an infra call that went in September to train technical staff at research infrastructures. And one of them you're participating on with us, with DARIAH, and I thought, oh, maybe I should have thought of this when we were putting in the training, but if we get one of them, I think I will slip it in. Because I think this is really maybe where the mindset should change, because most humanities researchers don't have the technical skills and they just rely on what they're told. And even if you argue, as I do, surprising as it might be, right, that I would argue with anybody, for different technologies, amazingly, I lose every battle. So I think it's a mindset as well as the code. I think we have to change the way we think about it, building for an ecosystem, not just for my project, and what is the ethical imperative that we have now to think beyond the life cycle of our grant funding. Maybe we do need, in a way that libraries and cultural institutions have been thinking about their digital objects, even though they have, and they do have a much more long-termism perspective, because that's what they do for a living. They keep physical stuff and now they keep digital stuff. But maybe we need to think, what does a digital preservation infrastructure for the digital humanities look like? What are the changes, the organizational shifts, the way that we provide offerings? So instead of being funded necessarily for individual projects, maybe it's, and we do have money and there will be more money in future for infrastructure funding. Maybe that is a place that we could tackle this. One of the ideas is this CHARM framework. It was a PhD thesis, especially directed at the digital humanities in thinking about preservation. So, what do I think about all this? Somehow I feel I have been in this place before. As I said, I was around, my McGreevy project went online in 2000, so it is amazing, it still works. You know, as I said, the server falls over once in a while. Shockingly, the developer is still there at University of Virginia, so I email him, he restarts it, and boof, McGreevy is back. So it's like amazing, although I am looking for a longer-term solution for him. So I feel like at some level I've been on this like nostalgia journey, because this keeps coming and coming back, and we keep talking about it as communities, and then we're in the same place we were a long time ago. But I think we're different. I think now we should know better. And maybe my 1990s technology stack for Mr. McGreevy is HTML, XML, CSS, and JavaScript, and maybe that's coming back into fashion. So you know how someone told me once that women's clothes every like 20, 30 years, girls dress like their mothers did when they were their age. Maybe the same thing is happening with the technologies that I used at the beginning of my career. They're all coming back to fashion. We've discussed this in the DARIAH Board of Directors, and we think, yeah, we do have a role. We do have a clear mandate to support the infrastructural needs in digital humanities, and we really need to work in the areas outlined in this paper, this talk, a conceptual framework, the technological solutions, and also how do we move this forward at a strategic and/or policy level. I think we need a lot more focus to ensure that the digital scholarship that our colleagues produce is fair, but also can be accessed for the long term, because there's no point in creating this stuff and then having it disappear. That doesn't become part of the scholarly record. So these are my takeaways. I don't have lots of answers. I feel we shouldn't be at the beginning of this journey, but I think we still are. As for my own projects, I've been trying to get the Digital Repository of Ireland to deposit my McGreevy files, and then I want to take them and do some bigger, not big, but bigger data research with them. Because I think now time has caught up with what I did at the very beginning, and I think the analysis of all the files I have, there's like 500 of them, I think could be really interesting to do. Letters, Mate, and maybe some of you know about. I think this is a much more difficult project, much more recent, also done with a technology stack that's probably not very sustainable. And this is something that Anne and I also have been talking about. So thank you very much, and I'm very much looking forward to your ideas on this.